Thank you everyone for coming. I know it must be really hard to peel yourselves out of bed early in the morning to be here, but I really appreciate seeing so many people here at 9 o'clock in the morning to hear me talk, so thank you. So the theme is Crossroads, and I define Crossroads as those moments in my life where I felt like I was caught between two worlds and had to make difficult decisions. Today, I'll be going over those contemplative moments and how it's shaped the work that I do and the person that I am. That's me on the left. Yeah. Those are my parents. So I'm a Latina artist. I'm the daughter of two Mexican immigrants who moved here in the 1970s. I was born and raised in Oak Cliff, Dallas, Texas, and I've always battled balancing two worlds. My American identity and my Mexican identity that was very much present in my household when I was growing up because of my parents. I went to school being educated and socialized under my American identity. I spoke English at school, I read in English, I was educated in English, I listened to rap music with my friends, I went to rock concerts, but at the end of the day, I came home and spoke in Spanish and listened to Tejano and ate tortillas con mole. The battle between these two worlds became more apparent the farther I went in school. I was born and raised in Oak Cliff, and I was raised in Oak Cliff during the 1990s. So this was like the pre-gentrification era. And there was a lot of gang violence and teen pregnancy. And I knew from a very young age that I didn't want to be a part of that environment. And so I did everything that I could to kind of apply to schools that existed outside of my neighborhood. And I had to battle my parents like on every single school that I wanted to apply to because they couldn't understand why I wanted to seek out going to other schools that were farther away and deal with the commute when we had schools available in my neighborhood of Oak Cliff. But I just always knew that I wasn't going to receive the education that I wanted at the time in Oak Cliff. And so I applied to schools that existed outside of that neighborhood. And so it was a battle with my parents, and I fought them on a lot of it. But with every school, they ended up caving and supported me throughout whatever school that I ended up going to. And so I ended up receiving a full scholarship to Hamilton College in upstate New York. And so my years at Hamilton were wonderful, but they were really, really hard on me. I was challenged in the most amazing ways academically. However, I think like the biggest challenge that I had at Hamilton was trying to decide what type of artist I wanted to be. So like at the time I was taking a lot of women's studies courses and I was becoming an activist. And so when it came time to pick my thesis, I had to decide what path I wanted to take. Did I want to be an artist that makes work that's more accepted in galleries for monetary gain, or did I want to make work that challenges social structures and risk not being to financially live off of my work? And so I ended up choosing the latter because it was more important for me to help people, and it was more important than monetary gain. My years at Hamilton, I had moved the farthest away from my home that I had ever lived. And it was really hard for me because I couldn't really connect with a lot of the students there. A lot of the students at Hamilton came from very privileged, wealthy families, and I couldn't really connect with them. And I also couldn't find a lot of students of color for me to be around and connect with either. And so I was completely uprooted from my community, and it took me moving really far away to realize that I missed my home and I wanted to come back to Dallas. So after I graduated, I ended up coming back to Dallas and going to graduate school at the University of Dallas. While I was in graduate school, I had to figure out what I really wanted to make work about when I was trying to figure out my thesis. And I knew I wanted it to be geared towards social justice issues, but I just didn't know which one. And so I ended up making work about immigration because it was more of a personal topic for me since I grew up in an immigrant household. And so for my thesis, I ended up settling on immigration at the US-Mexico border and the portrayal of immigrants in the media and how it's used to instill fear and tension between the United States and Mexico. So after I graduated, Trump was elected president for the first time. And out of complete devastation, I ended up booking a flight a week after the election to Washington, D.C. to attend the Women's March. And so I remember being really conflicted about that, about going, because I knew it was gonna be dangerous there. You know, it was supposed to take place the day after his inauguration. And so I was honestly just really scared to be there. But I felt like it was kind of a calling, like I really needed to be there. And so I ended up going, and so you can't really see it, but this is actually a photograph of me and my friends standing in front of the Capitol the night before, not really knowing what was going to ensue the next day. We were not aware at all of the impact that this march was gonna have that next day. And so the Women's March really changed me. Being there, it made me realize that, you know, like the gravity that our voice, the impact that our voices can have when we do it collectively. And so being there and experiencing that, I had decided that from that moment on, that whatever artwork I was going to make, I had to make sure that it spoke on behalf or for the greater good. And I always had to make sure that my work was always rooted within my community. And so after DC, I came back to Dallas and I volunteered with a ton of activist groups because I was trying to find where I would fit in. And I knew I wanted to make artwork, but I also wanted to connect with my community. So I volunteered and I ended up in Houston and hooking up with a group called Preemptive Love Coalition. And we were there building houses for Hurricane Harvey victims. And so I remember being there and kind of just standing in these vacant neighborhoods from people who had to leave because there was severe flooding damage to a lot of their houses. And it was a surreal moment for me, just standing in those neighborhoods. No one was living in these houses. Everything was destroyed. And I was wondering how scary it would be having to leave your home because of an environmental disaster. And so later that night, we ended up going to a dinner in a more lower income neighborhood where some of the houses had just gotten rebuilt. And we were there celebrating. It was a very happy occasion, and I was very, very happy that these families had their homes back. But I remember sitting there thinking, it's gonna flood again because of the location of this neighborhood. And so thinking of this in a bigger scope, we can continue to rebuild all we want after these environmental disasters, but we're only really putting a Band-Aid on the issue. No one's talking about the root of what's causing this. No one's talking about the severity of the storms and the frequency at which they're occurring. So after I volunteered, I came back to Dallas and I realized the immediacy of the problem, and so I decided to fully devote my time to making work about climate migration. And so this topic had come up before while I was doing research in graduate school. I kept seeing the term climate migration in a lot of my sources, and I thought it was a really interesting idea because I haven't heard that term in that way before. Up until then, I had thought about human migration in terms of political, religious turmoil, or people moving because of violence and things like that, but I never thought about people having to move because of environmental issues. I had known about some of that in like our history, but it was always like prehistoric stuff or like people moving in the Middle Ages, but I never thought about climate migration as a current issue. And so in grad school, I remember thinking that it was really interesting, and I put it on the back burner and decided to finish my thesis and saying what I had to say about what I was making at the time, and then come back to it whenever I felt ready. And so after I was in Houston, I decided to, like, now would be a really good time to make the work about that. So I've been making work about human climate migration for about 6 years now. And at first I started making it about environmental disasters globally, but it became such a broad topic that I had to really hone in on a specific region. And so for the past 4 years, I've been focusing on people moving towards the US-Mexico border from Mexico, Central America, and South America because of environmental disasters. And the reason that I became interested in that region is because I kept reading about the Corredor Seco, which is this area in Central America called the Dry Corridor. And they're experiencing a lot of massive flooding and a lot of drought that's causing people to move because of poor crop yields. So making work about this region really made me reflect on my upbringing and my roots. At the time, I was reading a lot about my history and my cultural identity. I was having a lot of conversations with my family. And then I also was thinking about the concept of a home. You know, what is a home? And I just couldn't imagine what it must be like to have to leave your home and not actually be able to come back because it's uninhabitable. And that was a very, very devastating idea for me. And so I was also thinking about what's at jeopardy when people start moving too, right? And because so much of our cultural identity is tied to our land. And so once you start moving and people start leaving, and some of those things start getting lost as soon as you start crossing borders because you're expected to assimilate into another culture. Right? Because in my Mexican history, you know, the US-Mexico border has caused, you know, as soon as people cross, you know, for the longest time, we weren't even able to speak Spanish in schools. And so things like language start to get lost. And so there's a lot of jeopardy when people start to migrate and move. And so those were the things that I was starting to think about. So in 2023, I was approached by the Galleria Artist Collective to be featured as their window artist for Hispanic Heritage Month. Now, you guys know the Galleria is a mall here in Dallas. And when I was approached, I had no idea what the hell this was. You know, like I didn't know, like what do they want me to do? I'm a window artist, right? So I looked into it, and it really made me think about some things. It made me think about what I was doing and where I was showing, because I went to graduate school and I got an MFA, and you're trained and you're told that you should be showing in gallery spaces and in museums and things like that. And so I decided to go for it because I thought it was a really good idea. It's actually pretty genius because it's in public. And so it made me think about the spaces I was showing and where I want the work to go. And so having it in a mall gives me access to people who don't even go to art shows at all. And I thought that was a really interesting concept. And so, yeah, it kind of just had me change my mindset on the spaces I should be showing in too. And so like, I typically have shows in galleries, and I've had some luck with some museums and stuff, but those are typically people that look at art all the time or go to art shows. And so it was important for me to show my work in a public space and have access to people who don't look at art normally. So now that I was developing the work and where to show it, I reached a point where it wasn't enough for me again. So I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do next, and I I realized that I really needed to speak more publicly about the work and have these conversations with as many people as possible. And so I was very lucky to team up and be a part of a panel for the what is it, the Association of Borderland Studies at the World Social Sciences Association in San Antonio. And so this was a conference with a lot of scholars from all over the country who were there to talk about border issues. And so I was on this panel with other scholars and other artists talking about who make work and write about border related problems. And so this was kind of really good experience for me because I was able to have these conversations with other people, and it made me realize that I can make the work all I want, and that's all great, but I really need to also have these discussions with other people and make sure that I'm talking to people, just like I'm doing with all you lovely people today. So in the summer of 2023, Texas was hitting record temperatures. And I don't know if you guys remember that summer, but we were hitting triple degree weather for like a month straight here. And so it was really hot. And there were some laws that were passed that in Texas that kind of became the catalyst for the work that I'm making today. So one of them was the deployment of a 1,000-foot line of buoys and mesh in the Rio Grande. These things are like these huge orange spheres that kind of just sit on top of the Rio Grande River. And in between them, there's like these crazy razor blades. And there's like this mesh that's attached underneath it that sits underneath the water. And so this mechanism was placed in the water as a way to deter immigrants from crossing. It's super dangerous. People have gotten caught in it. People have gotten killed. And it's also really dangerous for the ecosystems that exist in the water. So there was that. And then there was also what's considered the Death Star Law, which was the elimination of mandatory water breaks for construction workers. And so these were clearly attacks on the immigrant community. And so I had 2 solo shows lined up at the end of 2024, one at the Oak Cliff Cultural Center and one at the Latino Cultural Center. And I decided to devote both shows to heat-related disasters and the weaponization of the environment at the US-Mexico border. I wanted to make work about heat-related disasters to give them a visual because it's something that climate scientists are actually struggling with. It's really hard for them to get people or the general public interested in heat-related disasters because it doesn't, or take them seriously because it doesn't have a visual like other disasters do, like hurricanes, right? So like when a hurricane plows through a neighborhood, there's all this destruction that happens and you can see it. But with heat-related disasters, it's considered an invisible disaster, but it kills more people annually. And so this piece right here is called Yesterday's News, and it's an accumulation of articles that I read about heat-related disasters in that region within the 3-year span. And all of those articles are sitting, all that red and orange that you're seeing, all of those articles are sitting underneath the 2023 Climate Shift Index. Figuring out how to make work about heat was very, very tricky. How do you give something a form when it's considered invisible? And so I typically work in the way where I've always been a 2-dimensional artist. I make drawings and paintings, and I've always had shows that only had drawings and paintings in them. And so it seemed like the safe route for me to take to make these shows with paintings and drawings because, it's something that I'm used to. Or like I had to pick, the other route where I wanted to experiment and play with installation work something that I've been wanting to do, but haven't gotten to it. And so I ended up doing some installation works for those two shows. And so what you're seeing right here are, it's a window installation that I did at the Oak Cliff Cultural Center. And it's a series of thermometers on the windows. And it's meant to address the heat island effect that occurs in a lot of urban areas due to, like Oak Cliff, due to the lack of trees and greenery. This is another installation I did. This one was at the Latino Cultural Center, and it's called Masagua. And it represents a line of people waiting for a water truck to disperse water to its community. And it's about the water crisis that occurred in Mexico City the summer before. So this is a detail of that. Again, I'm using the climate index and the silhouettes of the people. And so installation work sparked something in my art practice, and it kind of changed someone's experience when coming to my shows. It wasn't a painting on the wall anymore. It was more of an experience. And so, I find myself today just looking and reflecting at the work that I just made for these past two shows and doing more research. And now I'm, trying to figure out what to do next with my life and my art practice. But thank you. And this is my info. And then if you're wanting to help or volunteer, there's a list of organizations down here. I'm not affiliated with any of them, but I know a lot of the people that run these organizations, and they're great. They're always looking for volunteers and donations. So yeah, that's it. That's my spiel. That was great. You're perfect on timing. Thank you so much for sharing all the resources. Please take a picture of it. We'll also send out the information afterwards. But let's help spread the word on these critical issues. 10 minutes, open questions. Please speak up. Yes.
I just, excuse me, you said heat doesn't have form. Just looking at your work, there's things like your crossroads of identity, and then there's a certain visual symbols that were easy for you to use, or maybe easy for you to use. Can you talk about that? And you had to find symbols that went with this thing that doesn't have form, right? Like feelings.
Yeah.
Just can you talk about finding those and where did you start looking? I mean, the kind of heat map looks like one.
Yeah. I approached making the work for those shows, especially the installation stuff, very differently than what I typically do. I just kind of before I would just paint and then just spend hours and days and weeks on a painting. And then when I approached this work, I decided to devote more time to thinking about things instead of just doing them. And so that kind of changed the work completely because it made me really think about, I had to sit there and think, all right, well, how am I gonna get the message across to where everybody can understand? And I didn't want to get too conceptual on things, but I don't know, I just kind of had to think about it. I had to sit there and think about what does heat look like, and that's why I ended up using the red lights on that last installation. Because when people stepped into that, they felt hot, even though it wasn't hot. So there were just things like that I had to kind of think about. That makes sense. I don't know if that answers it, but I tried. Yeah.
Just a comment, kind of based on what you were just talking about, because I remember when I first met you at the open studio, the pictures had that warmth, almost a glow to them.
Yeah.
So I think the pictures don't necessarily do it justice.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how do we make it right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I try to, I don't, I think of environmental climate migration as an intersectional thing. It's not just damage to the environment and then people move. It affects everything else. It affects politics, economies, like all of it, and social issues too. And so, when I make a lot of the work, I try to embed some of the things that are at jeopardy here, which is our cultural identity too. And so when I put them in the work, it's like also I'm using it as a way to celebrate those things too. Like this is something that we should be celebrating, and this is what's at jeopardy when people have to start moving.
So we're seeing civil rights crisis and environmental impacts of the current administration.
Mhm.
How do you see your work changing over the next 4 years? What are some of the challenges you're facing?
Ooh. You know, I was very active the first time around when he was elected, right? Like I was trying to join all of these activist groups and stuff, um, and this time it's tricky because it's different. It is very different, and there's a lot of hostility. There's a lot of people fighting each other, and it's not just I'm starting to see it, and it's not just within these. It's not like conservatives against liberal kind of thing. Like I'm seeing a lot of fighting just even within liberal circles, and that's very scary for me. And so I think what I want to do is I want to really make sure that I'm making art, but I really have to be connected to the community somehow. I have to keep talking to people and try to have conversations so that everybody can kind of chill out a little bit and then like somehow just find ways to become active and try to do something themselves. So I hope with the work that I make that I spark some of that, or just even get people to just be a little bit more compassionate towards one another.
I know you're a member of the current cohort at the Cedars
Mhm.
Union.
Yes.
Do you have anything coming up that you could tell us about? Any shows or speaking? Do you have dates for that yet? Or just a volume there, I guess?
No, I think we don't have anything coming up, right? Hi, that's Danielle and that's Taylor. They're part of the Cedars.
Well, you can get our business cards and check out our website. I feel like people know she's there too.
Yeah, yeah.
We host regular open houses where you can see Eliana and our other wonderful artists like Ray and their designers.
Yay. Yes.
So thank you for that honest answer. Like it feels different, right? The season feels very different. When you talk about you were doing this for this community, I wonder what was sort of the reaction if you were able to measure people's like change of mind or perspective. I know that the art wasn't necessarily like a behavioral changing kind of project, or maybe it was. But I wonder how the community really received it. And then the border work feels distant from what happens here because even within West Dallas, people have to leave their neighborhoods because of environmental issues. So I wonder if the next step is also like reconnecting with that, like really closer to home.
Yeah.
Or that change really is.
Yeah, so that was actually the purpose of, I completely forgot to tell you guys about that. That was the purpose of this piece, because the whole show was about heat-related issues on the border, but that was like a way of me connecting a heat-related disaster that exists locally. Just as a reminder, like the heat island effect happens in a lot of urban areas, and a lot of the times those urban areas are in low income areas too. And so, the Oak Cliff Cultural Center sits on Jefferson Boulevard. And so it gets hot. Like, I don't know if you've ever walked down Jefferson Boulevard. That actually inspired this piece because I was there like 1 year before in 2023 walking down Jefferson Boulevard, and it was like 104 degrees or something. It was something crazy, and you could just feel, and that wasn't the actual temperature in Dallas. it just felt hotter there because all of that pavement and the cement was just like reflecting all of that heat off of it, and it was making it even hotter. And so, yeah, it's very like I am doing work about the U.S. Mexico border, but I really do want to talk about some of the local issues that are occurring here. Yes.
Oftentimes we hear a lot about different issues and there's not like the next steps, especially for, the average everyday person. And I feel like for most people, they're looking outwards, what is someone else going to do for me? How is someone else going to fix this? And should fix this. So for the people who are affected by these concerns, which it's all of us, right? What are some of the next steps that we can take within our own communities outside of just joining certain groups? Even if there are certain groups we should join, which ones are they?
You want me to go over some of the Yeah, I mean, I get that, and one thing I've learned, and all of you are probably learning right now, is that we can't really rely on our politicians to fix things for us, and so yeah, so there's some social personal responsibility you can take. Be mindful of what you're doing and how much you're wasting, type of thing. But there's also like a lot of organizations that you can be involved with and connecting with your community, because that's a big one for me. It's really important that we're all talking to each other and we're supporting one another right now. And so, yeah, there's some like local organizations that you could get in touch with. There was, and it's just like they do like, what they're doing. They're out there. Dallas for Change is an organization. Dallas for Change. If you ever speak to Anthony, but they're out there like every summer handing out water to people who are living out on the streets, because we're in a spot where most of us are lucky to sit in air conditioned rooms, but there's people living out on the streets in 100-degree weather. And so he's out there every summer collecting water bottles and just trying to hand them out to people who are living in the street. And you could, he's out there trying to fill their water bottles and making sure that no one dies, And in the winters, he's out there, handing out blankets and coats, and he collects them too. So like if you're going through your closet and you have a ton of like coats that you're not using or blankets, like you can just donate it to him, So there's like organizations that are doing stuff like that. The Oak Cliff Veggie Project hands out food to people. They have their own community garden, just like things like that. So, and they take volunteers all the time. So you can volunteer like a Sunday and just go help out and meet some people and talk to one another. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Have you had opportunities to display your work where those affected by climate migration, see it and react to it? What those responses have been?
Like, would I want to?
Have you had those opportunities? In some of your shows,
Yeah.
the stories that you're depicting, are those men and women able to sort of take it in? And I'd love to know if you've heard reactions from them.
Yeah, I haven't really thought about showing in places like that, because I think like the last thing those people are gonna want to worry about is an art show, if like their whole neighborhood's destroyed by a tornado or something like that. It just depends, on like the situation and where it's at and the gravity of the storm that went through or whatever damage it's caused. But yeah, I haven't really thought about that. I've been thinking more about focusing in areas like this, where we don't really see that much of it. You know what I mean? Like we don't get hurricanes. We deal with like tornadoes and stuff like that, but and heat. But I try to kind of talk about those things in these types of areas so that people are more aware of what's going on.